There were more blunders and brilliances in round 9 of the Candidates Tournament today. First of all, let's start with the game Karyakin against Kramnik. Now, we've reached this position after 7 moves. Karyakin has just played his queen to b3, attacking the pawn on b7. It's a fairly regular kind of Slav position. Kramnik has succeeded in bringing out his bishop outside this pawn chain, which is usually quite comfortable for black, but yeah, the queen now threatens the pawn. Now, a reasonable continuation for black here would be just to play queen b6, not bad. You could also take here first and then play queen b6, or maybe queen c8, just defend this. But instead, Kramnik simply took this pawn on c4. And Karyakin took the plunge and took this pawn on b7. Now you can see that that pawn on b7 is quite a key pawn in black's formation, because now the c6 pawn is weak, and it's actually rather difficult for black to gain counterplay, because of course that bishop on f4 does an excellent job of controlling squares on that diagonal. So what was going on? Well, who knows, because after this, white's pawn formation is still completely solid. He's going to pick up this pawn on c4, maybe this pawn on c6. Well, this is what happened. Karyakin took on c6. He's a clear pawn up here with a strong centre and 2 bishops. There's no real damage to his structure with double pawns. And actually, Karyakin never let his grip go on the game, and although the game went to 64 moves, he was never in any trouble at all and had a convincing victory over Kramnik. Who knows what Kramnik was thinking there in the opening, but pretty disastrous. Okay, let's move on to the game Mamedyarov against Aronian. Well, you can see a completely crazy position on the board. Aronian has the advantage of a rook against a knight. Mamedyarov sacrificed the exchange a long time ago, but you can see in this position that rook is completely offside. Aronian had a decent position but lost control, and you can see his king is in big trouble. Right in the opening, Aronian basically sacrificed his pawns on the king's side to get some initiative, but well, Mamedyarov is in control now. He played his pawn to h6, good move, protecting this fantastic pawn on g7, and queen f7. If c2, then the knight comes to h5, and it's over straight away actually. So queen f7. This doesn't prevent knight h5, but, well, it seems that black can defend for a moment. If this is taken, then queen e6 check, and it's forced mate. You can see in all these positions that black's king is terribly exposed. White's king is completely safe on this square. So after knight h5, the threat is knight f6. But this can be parried with bishop g6, so that now if knight f6, that can simply be taken, and the e8 square is covered by the bishop. Now, I'm sure there are many ways for white to win this position, but Mamedyarov's solution was, well, rather elegant actually. First of all, he gave up his queen. This has to be taken, and then, well, he gets the queen back straight away with knight f6. And of course the knight can't be captured because of the queen. And if c2, well, there's a beautiful variation here, absolutely beautiful. First of all, we bounce back with the knight. Well, it's not possible for black to stop white's pawn queening, so okay, he gets a queen. White gets a queen, and king takes knight forced. This endgame rather reminds me of the finish to the Karyakin's Fiddler endgame from yesterday. White can actually force checkmate in this position with a couple of careful moves. If the pawn is taken on h6, then bishop f8 is mate. The king has to come back. And now the bishop and the queen can force checkmate rather beautifully, actually. If the king goes to d8, then bishop f6 would be mate, if the king goes back there. And instead, king f8, bishop g7 is checkmate. So let's go back. So the only way to prolong the struggle is for black to bring back the rook to stop the pawn queening. Okay, Mamedyarov queened anyway, and they've reached an ending with bishops of opposite colours. And this reminds me of Mamedyarov's game against Svidler, actually. It's a similar kind of endgame. Excuse me, just 1 second. This is completely winning for white, because basically you can create passed pawns on both sides of the board, and it really doesn't matter about black's passed c pawn. And in this position, Aronian resigned here. It's pretty clear. Well, let me just give you a very quick example of what might happen. Let's say f4. Okay, you create a passed b pawn here. I mean, it doesn't even matter if black manages to take one of those kingside pawns. Basically, we're going to force through this pawn. Black will have to sacrifice the bishop, and then the pawns just go home. One of these will go home on the king side. You can see this pawn actually on c2 is quite irrelevant. Black can never support this with his king. So at the end, a convincing victory from Mamedyarov, and you know, shocking for Aronian, you know, desperately trying to catch or forge ahead in the tournament, I should say, and loses again. Okay, well, while all this was going on, let's have a look at what's happened with Anand. He played Topalov. Anand played against the Naidorf, steady variation, and gained a positional advantage, and slowly his advantage increased. You can see that he's got queen and bishop here, pressing on Topi's pawn on e6, which has to be defended by king and queen. So Topalov is really tied down in this position, and Anand has been squeezing here. Before he took any decisive action, he's advanced his pawns up the board. Now, this is significant later on, as we'll see. It's nice to press these pawns, so these are controlled here, and you never know when this one might drop off, and these far advanced pawns can play a very significant role in the game. So basically, Anand just improved his position to the maximum before making a break. And here black is in a kind of zugzwang. Fishy waited with pawn to c3. Excellent move. So, for example, if black's queen goes to the side, then queen f4 check is going to win this pawn. King g7, then queen f6 takes that pawn. Or if bishop d3, well, that bishop is loose. We give a check. The pawn is threatened, and if the king comes to defend it, then queen g3 picks up the bishop. And if bishop f5, this is no good, because we're going to win a pawn here. If this is actually rather similar to the game. If queen g5, then actually there's a winning king and pawn ending for white. These pawns are too far advanced, and one of them is going to go through. So back to the game. c3. Black is in a kind of zugzwang here. Topalov played bishop e4, and this allows c4. Obviously that pawn can't be taken, the bishop is hanging. If the bishop goes back, if black waits, well, it's too late to wait, because white wins a pawn with queen f3. Very simple. So Topi played bishop f5. I mean, it's very difficult for black here. I mean, this just loses a pawn, but there's not a lot else to do. Okay, Topi took here, and Anand exchanged and took this pawn. And black's problem is that, well, this pawn is loose. It's very difficult for black's king to find a good square. Topi tried this, but Anand cleverly picked off that pawn on c4 without damaging his own pawn, so his pawns are now perfectly placed. And I like Anand's technique here. He took no chances whatsoever. So you can see that he completely dominates the centre. If queens are centralised in a queen ending, that's very powerful. Really dominates the board, ties black's queen to defending here, and the king here is always exposed and vulnerable to checks. Remember, most king and pawn endings are going to be winning here. So let's see Anand's technique. He decides to bring his king up the board. This is excellent play. So he doesn't rush things with his e-pawn. Instead, he just improves the position of his king. This is great. And there's nothing that black can do here. So his king gets in a wonderful position. And this variation now shows black's helplessness here. If Toppy takes that pawn, you can see that it's possible for white to transpose into a king and pawn ending. And now we can see how powerful, how strong it is for white to have that pawn on a5, just preventing these two pawns from moving. And now, well, black loses very, very simply here. For example, here, let's just go to the end, and it's not actually stalemate because this pawn has to move, and then it's a very simple win and checkmate. So this is Toppy's problem. All the king and pawn endings, or most of the king and pawn endings, are losing. So Anand just keeps control here and even manages to improve the position of his king still further. Look what he does. I really like it that he didn't bother with the decentralization of his queen, probably also winning, but instead just improved the position of his king again. Great move, queen c4, offering the king and pawn ending, and in this way forcing the king into b6. If that pawn is taken, then check, and well, white is going to take here, and it's all over. Queen g7 played instead. King b6. And white just keeping complete control, making sure there are no checks at all. Now, of course, black has to take care that his king isn't checkmated. I mean, what a wonderful king march here. And in this position, Topalov resigned. It really is all over. And can transpose to a king and pawn ending. Well, it's almost forced. So after queen f2, then queen c5, and the king and pawn is winning very quickly. Now, that was a wonderful performance from Anand, really smoothly played. So after 9 rounds, by the way, in Andreikin's Fiddler that was a draw. So after 9 rounds, Anand leads with 6. Aronian a point behind with 5. Kramnik, Karyarkin and Mamedyarov on 4.5 points. Andreikin's Fiddler on 4. Topalov on 3.5. There's a good reason why Anand is a point clear at this stage in the tournament. He simply played the most even chess with the fewest blunders. 5 rounds to go.